I now have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, who I've come to really like and have enjoyed working with over the last year or so, Jennifer Pahlka. Jennifer is a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center and at the Federation of American Scientists. She was the founder of Code for America. She also served as the deputy CTO, Chief Technology Officer for the U.S. government, and is the author of an outstanding book called Recoding America, which you might think by its title is about IT, and it is about information technology and about systems and how they relate in government, but really it is about how to reorient the government toward the people that government is supposed to serve. And Ezra Klein, the noted columnist and podcaster, called it a book I wish every policymaker in the world would read. So with that, I wanted to introduce Jennifer and thank all of you again for your attention.
Well, I could not be more honored to be here, and I'm especially honored to follow that, because all of what Jim and Ben talked about is so important to the message I have for you. And in fact, in the presentation I put together, I didn't touch on oversight enough, and yet it is so important, and I'm glad that we covered a bunch of that. I've got some slides. So I wrote a post on my Substack before the election called "Democrats Should Be the Party of Go." And now I just want to say, I want to talk about how Democrats can still be the party of go. I want to talk about two concepts. One I'm going to touch on very lightly, sadly, in the interest of time, which is abundance. Lots of people have different definitions for this word, but I'm going to generally say it's sort of tackling artificial scarcity and narrow interest capture so we can get more of the things that people need to them and rely potentially a little bit less on redistribution in order to have the equitable outcomes that we need. And the second concept is state capacity, which I think is a quite clear definition. I'm not talking about the 50 or 53 states. I'm talking about simply the ability of government at any level to achieve its policy goals. But that sounds very, very abstract. Of course, it's what Jim and Ben just talked about and gave you many examples. But for me, it became very personal this summer. I was home, I now live in DC, but I was home in Oakland, California, where I used to live for the summer. And I experienced I'm clicking in the wrong place. There we go. I experienced a home invasion. So I was on a Zoom call. I got off. I went into my bedroom. There was a man there going through my stuff. And I was fine. Don't worry. But what was disturbing is that I called 911. I was on hold for 5 minutes. They dropped the call. I called back. I was on hold for 7 minutes. Oakland Police Department showed up 2 days later. So a lot of people said, you must be outraged. I was not outraged, because I was fine. I was not a violent person, thank goodness. I was curious, and what I found when I did a little digging, I think I need to hold this over here, is that the Oakland Police Department has capacity problems. They are subject to, and I counted them, 10 different oversight bodies. 80 to 90% of their time is spent on paperwork, some of it literal paper, a lot of it just entering the same information into up to 12 different IT systems. It's not just the IT, though. Officers have to consider 19 different policies in a split second before they can decide whether to pursue a subject. And of course, this is, they're incredibly understaffed. The time it takes to hire a new police officer is really, really long. So these are capacity issues. And of course, then my professional person sort of kicked in, and I was like, okay, wait, what are we saying about capacity? Well, here's what we think. If you want a government that can do what it says it will do, we have a force to protect the public, you need to be able to hire the right people and fire the wrong ones. You need to burden those people less through clearer focus on what they're supposed to do and reduction of the procedures that bury them and make it very hard for them to get their work done. You need to invest in digital and data infrastructure. And I'm so glad you guys talked about this, you have to close that loop between policy and implementation. We don't have a feedback loop if you don't do oversight the way these guys talked about, so you don't know what's working. You add another oversight body, not even knowing there are 9 others. So, of course, this isn't just a problem at the local level. Approximately 2 years after the big bills of the Biden administration were passed, we had spent only 17% of the funds total. We've gotten better since then. This is a statistic from, I want to say, April or May. We've now got more money out the door, but whatever, of course, isn't out the door is now subject to clawback by the Trump administration, which breaks my heart, especially on the IRA. We saw it with pandemic unemployment, unemployment insurance, where we just didn't get benefits to the people who needed them. The first 3 chapters of my book, Recoding America, which Jim mentioned, are all on the pandemic unemployment insurance disaster. And trust me, what you think was wrong is not what was actually wrong. It's not COBOL. That's not the problem. We said, we wanted kids to be able to get their applications in for financial assistance, but that didn't work out so well. I skipped one here. When we fast track a power project under something like the IRA, this actually was obviously long predates the IRA. We fast track a project and it still takes 17 years. We are having a lot of trouble securing our nation, right? Our military is in trouble. We can't uphold the commitments that we make to our partners overseas. And this is because, again, as Jim talked about, we have a waterfall process with no closed loop where we make policy, we send it off to be implemented, and we kind of go, oh, what happened? We're not really sure. I really believe that declining state capacity is the issue, is the crisis that is underpinning all of the other visible crises that take up your time every day. You're fighting over and over again on the visible crises that people are complaining about because nobody ever, comes to you and says, hey, I'm really worried about hiring times in the bureaucracy. They complain about the outcomes, but if you don't address the thing that's sitting under that, we can't get anywhere at that. I was with City of LA, and the head of policy implementation came up to me afterwards, and she said, we have 9 priorities. We can't do any of them because we're not dealing with that crisis underneath. So I want to talk briefly about how we got there. My colleague, so if you go into, this is a quote for someone who works at a federal agency, but you'll hear this in state and local agencies too. The legislature orders us to do something by a deadline. The compliance offices stop us from doing it. So I'm on the CHIPS team. I'm supposed to hire 300 people to get CHIPS money out the door. I hire a bunch of people. I love OPM, but like OPM, Office of Personnel Management, comes in and says, oh, you used the wrong authorities. You got to redo that all. Well, it's like we need to get the CHIPS money out the door. This is their experience in the bureaucracy. So this is the metaphor I would like to, really for you guys to sort of work with here. When we decide to hit the gas, but our foot is still all the way on the brake. Oh, and the parking brake is pulled, and there's a boot on the car. We've done all these things to ourselves such that if you want to hit the gas, you got to take the brake off first. And that's the work that we need to do. My colleague at Niskanen, Nick Bagley, has coined the term the procedure fetish, which people like. He says, our legal and political culture is enthralled to the belief that strict procedural rules are necessary to address pervasive anxiety about state power. If that makes sense to you, right? So we're saying, I'm not sure we can make this decision. We better have a lot of processes in place. We're worried about, accountability. And so we make more procedures which progressively burden the state and exacerbate the problems that the procedures were supposed to solve in the first place, which leads to worse service, poor outcomes, and drives that anxiety. We have to break this cycle. I know you're not all legislators, but for those of you who are, when you write legislation, you think you are writing magic words, right? And you kind of are. But much like Mickey, do you remember this cartoon from many long ago? He casts a spell to make the broomsticks carry his water for him, but then he goes to sleep. And I think we've been asleep. And what happens? He wakes up, and the broomsticks have multiplied, and they are now drowning him in water. That is what's happening with a lot of our law and policy. We don't think we've done it. We wrote a simple, clear law, right? But take NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, for example. Do you know what it really says, like in just the law? There's no project review required at all. My colleague, Mark Dunkelman, says it's like, what the authors envisioned was that two bureaucrats would kibitz for a few minutes every year and talk about the general direction of environmental policy. Now, and I've been told these numbers are wrong, but now, of course, we review every project. The average time to complete a NEPA review is 3 years. I think it's actually, they've been told it's higher. The average environmental impact statement report is, I've been told, 2,000 pages. I was apparently looking at different numbers. So it started with this very simple intent, and over time it became absolutely unmanageable. And the result is what's really important here, because we wrote the law to protect the environment. But now what it's doing is keeping us from building the green infrastructure we need to avoid a climate collapse so that we can protect the environment. So this is what I call the cascade of rigidity. High-level intent, high-level rules. When that cascades through a very rigid bureaucracy, at every level, the next person makes it a little bit more rigid and a little bit more rigid. You start out with a low-burden idea. What comes out at the end is a very high-burden idea, but more importantly, you start out with a written intent, and what you get is either not that intent, less of that intent that you wanted, or the opposite of that intent. So I want to return to the notion that if you want a government that does what it needs to do, you're going to have to do these things that your constituents are not actually asking you to do, because they don't know that this is underlying this. I'm going to tap on the last one a little bit more, closing the loop with, between policy and implementation for feedback loops. Instead of that policy implementation shrug, and this actually, I think, resonates again with Jim and Ben's circles. We need this feedback loop. So we build, measure, learn, understand what's going on. And there's a lot to say, I think, about the mechanisms that are being tried now to close that loop. I'm going to skip this slide. There's a bunch of very concrete things I think we can do, policy recommendations, operational work. But what I want to say they kind of all add up to, and we can return to this in Q&A if you want to, is that we have the wrong mindset, I think, about what elected leaders are supposed to do. We think that your jobs are to plant seeds. Those seeds are initiatives or bills or executive orders or whatever they are. And when the idea is that when those seeds grow into something that provides shade or fruit or flowers for the public, you've done good and you're going to get elected. Anyone here a gardener? How much of your time is spent planting seeds? You tend the soil. That's not what the public is asking of you. You go back to get reelected, you say, oh, I want to show you my legislative record. But what we need to do is tend the soil. And I'm recently interested in sort of mashing that metaphor up with another one, which is of fires. So I live during summers in a very tiny town in rural California. Boy, is that area red. I think I am the only Democrat. And it is in the highest fire risk in the state, which must be the highest fire risk in the country. Like, this place is gonna burn. When we first were moving there, the fire chief, who's our neighbor, came by and he said, when Native people controlled this land, there were 50 stems per acre. There are now 1,500 stems per acre. That is a fire management problem that is almost unsolvable. When Native people lived on that land, they did controlled burns. That is how the soil remained healthy. That is how the underbrush got taken away. And in 1850, we passed a policy of fire suppression. And now there is so much fuel that what we're getting is megafires. What we need to do are controlled burns. But it's the opposite of what we have been doing. We got to stop putting out those fires. We got to start them. And unfortunately, I think in the federal government context now, we're going to have to start a few that serve as sort of blockers for the megafire that's coming. But we as Democrats have to start owning that controlled burn, because it's the soil. It makes the soil healthy, makes our bureaucracies work better, and it delivers for people. We can't be the party of government if government doesn't work. I want to leave you with a couple of recommendations. I put my book up there. I'm usually not very self-promotion, but I'm told to do it. And then, of course, Jim promoted my book, so thank you. There's a book coming out called Why Nothing Works by Mark Dunkelman. You have to, as a Democrat, you have to read this book. It is definitely the left lecturing at the left about what we have done wrong, and it asks for a mind shift. It is a shift in how we think about progressive politics and the outcomes that they're actually getting. And I can't recommend it highly enough, but it's not out till February 18th. And please, I invite you to subscribe to my Substack, which is weirdly called Eating Policy, which is like a terrible name. I know, it's a weird name. It's because I have a concept in my book that culture eats policy, right? You've heard the, culture eats strategy, but in government, the culture, that rigidity is actually, is eating the intent of the policy, and that's what's coming out the other end. But nobody gets it, so it was a very bad name. But anyway, I hope that you'll follow up in that way, and I would love to take some questions.
Jen, I really appreciate all of your contributions. I think you've been a breath of fresh air. How do you, as a bona fide Democrat and who really cares about these policies and making government work, deal with the incoming from people who think that your criticism of how government is actually working is creating more of a problem? What are the strategies, or how do you kind of disarm or diffuse that criticism?
Well, I think the vibe changed a lot on November 6th. I think that both past speakers talked about it. We've got to tell the truth. I am often told, don't say that it doesn't look good for Democrats. And I'm like, yeah, losing doesn't look good for Democrats either. We have got to also be the party of telling the truth. I mean, how I diffuse it is I just keep saying what I need to say. Though I will say I also have been softer in my criticisms. And you go softer in your criticisms leading up to an election, right? And that makes sense. I'm a Democrat. But now I've become a little bit of a focus point or focal point for public servants. I know most of my social circle are people who work in agencies. State and local as well, but certainly, heavily federal. And yes, they are horrified by the prospect of Schedule F, which is a terrible idea that gets at the root of the civil service's independence. But secretly, they don't want to say it publicly, but to me, they'll say, a reduction in force would actually make my agency work better. Not the way, unfortunately, Elon Musk is going to do it, but if we could do it actually based on performance, we would do better. If we could do some of this regulatory rollback that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are talking about, I would be so much more effective in my job, and that's what I want. That's what I want for years, is to be able to serve the public, to be able to get these veterans benefits out. And they don't want to say it publicly, so they say it to me. And I think we need to start saying it publicly. We have nothing to lose now.
Is that some of what you mean by the opportunity of controlled burn?
Yes.
Can you say anything more at a local level for us about what you see on that opportunity landscape.
Yeah, I mean, by controlled burn, I mean, what was the example that Congressman Kilmer gave about the regulations? Oh, that for instance, that kept the that nonprofit from being able to do the innovative financial program. I mean, that was, I think, the case of needing to update a regulation because that they hadn't anticipated that kind of innovative program. But if you've not spent time in an agency or department and seen how hard it is to get the work done, you don't really understand how much governs the work that is being done and how much those public servants want that rolled back. And it sounds, I mean, I kind of figured this out like 10 years ago when I started Code for America, and I was like, oh my God, am I a Republican? I'm like deregulatory? Like, is that what this means? And I'm not horrified by the idea of being Republican, but like I think that my values align with the Democratic Party. But the controlled burn is about clearing out that cruft that keeps the agencies from being able to deliver at the speed that they and quality that they need to. It's not just that, but that's certainly, I think, the biggest part of it. What we forget is that when, whether it's at the legislative level or in the executive branch, whenever we add a rule, first of all, it's adding to, we always add and never subtract, which makes it so hard to do anything. And also that when we think it's a simple thing, not a big deal, why would we worry about this? You don't realize how how cumbersome it's going to get over time. Representative, I'm going to mangle her last name, from Washington is on Twitter talking about being told about a regulation that keeps childcare workers from cutting up, for peeling a banana or an orange for kids. Whoever wrote that did not think they were doing a bad thing, but that has resulted in a bad thing, and we need to spend more time taking those things away than we do adding new things. There's also, frankly, programs that just shouldn't be anymore. I mean, there's something at the Social Security Administration that gives, when your partner dies, if they've worked for a certain number of years, they get a $225 death benefit. Well, that was intended to cover funeral costs in 1950-something, and Congress has capped the benefit. We're still spending all of the energy and time, delivering a program that is like de minimis in terms of its benefit to anybody. It's only ever going to be $225. Like, just take that away and spend your energy actually getting the results that are needed to, put those people on fixing the disability backlog. That's, completely unacceptable, the disability. I'm experiencing this right now.
Thank you so much for your bravery. And I'm from Santa Barbara, California, and
a little bit fires.
Yeah, exactly. So we have one of the worst poverty rates in our county in the state, and yet as of several years ago, we had also one of the worst participation rates in food stamps. I know you've done a lot in that area. Can you just give the rest of us a refresher on the bureaucracy there and what you've done and how that's getting better? Because it's something I'm really tackling. We also have 800 people working in our social services department, yet we still have the second highest rate of poverty. So it's just this maddening thing I've been trying to cut and get at the heart of why we're not reaching people.
Yeah, and I love California, but we have this state that shows that when you have a whole bunch of resources and it gives you the ability to make things really complicated, you get worse outcomes, not better. So when we started working on SNAP in California in 2013, I think, California was second worst in the country on participation in SNAP. The only state with a lower participation rate was Wyoming. Compare with Maine, which had a very anti-welfare leader and very anti-welfare welfare rhetoric, and therefore a very small team to deliver. So Maine had a very simple application for applying because they couldn't hire Deloitte to spend billions of dollars building it. California did. The application didn't work on a mobile phone. It was 212 questions. Some of those questions were things like, have you ever been convicted of selling your SNAP benefits for drugs, ammunition, or guns since April 12th, 1995? And there's like a whole series of questions like that are just completely insulting, And by the way, I think that picks up on this issue of like, we think we have done a good thing for people, but if we actually haven't tried to apply ourselves, we don't know how much we are insulting the people that we're trying to help. So Code for America, we made a very simple app that worked on a mobile phone that used branching logic, so we could only ask you the questions that you needed to. Because SNAP required at the time, and I guess it still does for now, an interview, we're like, we don't have to ask all of these questions. Like, what we need them to do is upload their pay stubs so that when the social worker talks to them, they can verify the income. And like, that's the thing. The thing you most need is their documentation, their name, phone number, and email, and then let the social worker do the rest. And basically that would create an application that we would feed into the My Benefits CalWIN system, which I don't think you guys are My Benefits. You were there are 3 different consortia in California, depending on where you were. But, and that was sort of the start of this realization that that's a big reason why we had such a low participation rate, is nobody could get through that 212 question form, especially if you go to the library and the computers time out after 30 minutes, but you can't get through the application in 30 minutes. So like you just sort of start over when the thing times out. The participation rates in California have gotten better. What they were trying to do at the time, and I think this speaks to sort of our instincts, was like advertise the program. So there were bus ads all over the low-income parts of San Francisco advertising the program. Like, nobody bothered to try the application to see that you could get someone to go to it, but you couldn't get them through it. And that, I think, is indicative of what I'm hoping Democratic leaders will do more of, which is like dig in. The best advice I ever got from my team at Code for America is never talk about a service you haven't tried to use yourself. We're good?
Shout it out, Monroe.
Okay. Jennifer, so excited you're here. Monroe Weinberg, love your book. Excited to see you part of this conference. You're speaking to a room of elected officials. Have you seen any examples of candidates who have tried to sort of center campaigns around this kind of thinking in some way and succeeded at that? Got themselves reelected?
I am the opposite of a political consultant, and so do never, ever ask me for advice on what to run on. Right? Who here is that person? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm not that person. I don't think you can run on a platform of civil service reform or benefits, but I think you can sometimes talk about the results once you've done them. And I think as a party, it's simply the right thing to do to make these things better. But I'm I would be an absolutely terrible politician. But as an example of people who are doing the work, not running on the work, I'll give you this one. David Chu, the city attorney of San Francisco, brilliant guy. We're working with him and the Stanford Reg Lab to use large language models, AI, to go through the volumes of policy and regulation that govern the city of San Francisco and simplify them. So I'm sort of simple example because it's not having a real impact right now, but Santa Clara County is full of these terrible old racial covenants that you could never have found before, but now an LLM can get them and actually see, okay, this reference to a racial covenant actually is, hits a different document, and they can sort of spider out and get all of the references and actually remove them. But I think something more substantive is San Francisco is known for the $1.7 million toilet. Do we all know about this? That obviously is the result of layers and layers of governance and policy. And so we're, it's not that LLMs are doing the work, but they can be helpful in understanding, okay, if this was one of the things that contributed to that $1.7 million price tag, how do you unravel it? Well, you've got to follow the chain back. There's not like one place in the law. How do you follow it back and say, how are we going to unravel this piece? How are we going to unravel this piece so that we can, make a toilet for, let's just say, $500,000. So he's just an incredible leader. I don't think he intends to run on it, but man, is he working hard to make San Francisco better. And, I know he would be, I think he's been part of New Deal before, but if not, you should have him come talk about it. There's all sorts of great examples of this clearing of the brush going on, and I hope that next time I'm here that you all have your own stories about them. Thank you.